This is Crappy to Happy, and I am your host, Cass Dunn. I'm a clinical and coaching psychologist and mindfulness meditation teacher, and of course, author of the Crappy to Happy books. In this show, I bring you conversations with interesting, inspiring, intelligent people who are experts in their field and who have something of value to share that will help you feel less crappy and more happy. Dr. Kate Mason is an executive communication coach, a world champion debater, and she has coached thousands of women from teenage girls to C-suite leaders on how to use their voice without losing themselves. She works with teams from Google, Netflix, Microsoft, Uber, very impressive list, and many more. And she has written a book called Powerfully Likeable, A Woman's Guide to Effective Communication. I'm going to straight off the bat highly recommend that every woman go get a copy of this book. It is a smart, funny, and practical guide for what happens when women try to speak up in a world that keeps telling them no. Dr. Kate Mason, welcome to the Crappy to Happy podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Cass.
Kate, I remember a long time ago, somebody said, if you ask somebody whether it's more important to them to be respected or to be liked, they will usually tell you, if they give it some thought, they will usually say, no, it's more important for me to be respected. I think that's more important. But then if you ask them to look at all of their behaviors, like what they've been doing and the decisions that they've been making and how they've been managing conversations, usually you will find that their priority has been in action, has been more focused on being liked, which is why when I saw you had written this book about this kind of likability versus respect almost, I was so keen to talk to you about it. So are people, women, prioritizing being liked over being respected?
It's so funny, isn't it? I've seen the same comment, and I think it was actually Adam Grant who tweeted something about this semi-recently. Yeah, about this dichotomy or binary, if you like, between respect and likability. And part of the work that I try to do is to say this isn't a binary. There are not limited options here, at the leadership buffet. I think for many of us and many women, we feel like, I'm only allowed to pick one. I'm only allowed to pick, for example, being authoritative, and that means I must not have any friends or be likable or anything else, right? And similarly, we think, well, I can't be powerful if I want to be nice, so I better just be nice and have friends and be liked in the office, and I'll leave power to someone else. And so it almost feels like there's a scarcity mindset even before we answer that question in fullness, right? Which is we're only allowed to pick one at the beginning.
Yeah, that, and, even when I have asked that question of people over the years, because I can tell you that it was probably closer to 20 years ago that I first heard that. And often people will respond, their first response would be, well, both, like I want both. But okay, so if somebody believes that potentially it is a dichotomy, if they are prioritizing agreeableness, what kind of behaviors are you seeing? Like, how does this play out in people's behaviors in the workplace, for example, if they have that idea in their head, like it's one or the other?
Yes, I think it's a great question. So it's interesting that we code likability with agreeableness, right? Yeah. Likability, and where I like to push, is really just people being happy to be in your orbit. Right? If you've got somebody in your orbit who's likable, chances are you smile when you realize you're catching up with them, or you feel happy you've got a meeting with them that day. It's not necessarily that they bend over backwards for you or are very subservient or agreeable. It's just that you like being around them. And for whatever reason, as women, we've decided to encode being likable with someone who says, yeah, sure, no worries, and has porous boundaries and, is very demure and accepting of things. Yeah. As distinct from someone who could just be likable. So that's one thing I'll call out, which I'd love to get into. But you ask about that, what are the types of behaviors that I see? Well, I see a lot of porous boundaries is one, right? I'm not sure when I'm going to hold a line on something, or I'm going to say yes and then maybe regret it later. I see a lot of over-apologising, right? Apologising for things that aren't your problem or aren't up to you to solve. I see a lot of minimisation. It'll just take a sec, or I'll pop by your desk, or no worries if not. I see a lot of failure to own an accomplishment. Oh yes, yeah. I studied, at this sort of area where reality, you've got a master's. So there's certain patterns that I think we all have recognized or seen, and at times strategically have employed, right? There's times where you don't want to be that guy, but those are the behaviors that I do see enough that I realize, there's some patterning here that to me is really interesting and felt worthy of, further investigation.
You've got women in the title, A Woman's Guide to Effective Communication. Is this typically behavior of women? I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, but typically this is quite a gendered issue. Yes?
It is. It's a great question, Cass. I coach men and women, but I suppose I have a passion for the women I work with in particular, mainly because I resonate so much more with their own stories, because I've come through that. And that is always a particular draw for me. I do think there are men who struggle with some of these things, but I wanted to write the book through the lens of women, partly because it's what I know, and partly it's because where I saw those patterns be really obvious to me, and I thought that could be most helpful. But you're absolutely right. I think a man could read this book and learn a lot. It's just that the lens for me was really, I think we all walk tight ropes at work, but I think the gendered ones to me are really, really interesting.
Just as you were talking then, and I was thinking about the conditioning or the expectations that women have, you just rattled off a whole lot. And we could all just tick the boxes when you soften your language and you just, I just think, or in my opinion, not being direct with putting a point across. There are so many examples. And then there is this expectation or this stereotype, I guess, about the way men communicate and the way men behave in the workplace. And I'm even wondering, just as you were talking then, if there are men who even feel a little bit boxed in by that expectation, who might feel like they have to be very kind of forthright and direct and not warm and compassionate and soft and, all of those qualities that we typically associate with women, if they almost feel like they have to live up to some other expectation that's not true to them.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, binaries hurt everybody, right? Because they're exclusionary and they demand certain things from us. I think some people can take advantage of them, and other people, as you say, feel super constrained by them. And I have a lot of male clients who say things like, I want to be authoritative, but I don't want to mansplain, or be accused of that. Or I want to be in charge, but I also want to be really compassionate and kind. Like, how do I don't necessarily have a masculine role model of someone doing that, and how do I do it? So I think you're right. Self-aware people are asking all of those questions and really hyper-mindful, like, what am I saying and how am I leveraging my own strengths in these situations to get what I want, to motivate my team, to get people excited about whatever I'm selling. There's so many different contexts we use these sorts of things. And I think it's right to be thoughtful about it.
So they're in the workplace and they're just taking a sec, and all of these, the ways that they're prioritizing being likable and how that is minimizing and kind of softening and making themselves small. What I was going to ask you about essentially is what is the relationship between this focusing on likability and confidence at work?
Oh, that's a great one. So one of the things when you're focusing or sort of over-rotating on likability like that is that you actually do yourself and your work a great disservice. Because what you're saying to me, if you say, Kate, this will just take 2 seconds, is I immediately think whatever you're going to tell me is not that important. If it's just 2 seconds, you must be about to tell me, hey, the meeting's at 3:30, not 3, right? And of course, there are those sorts of updates and those are valid. But you're certainly not going to be sitting me down to walk me through this massive epiphany you've had, because definitionally that's not going to be that sort of a meeting. So suddenly, if you think about being your manager or the person you're trying to ask for 2 seconds from, you've immediately told them in your language, this is not important. And by extension, I don't see myself as worthy of having your time. And that's a devastating thing to do with just our language. And you've managed people or been managed. We've all been in these situations at some point in our careers, even if we've only had managers, right? We're early career. it's a devastating thing to essentially encode your language many times a day, or maybe many times even in the same meeting, with I'm not worthy or my idea is not worthy. To me, that's like out of the gate, what a terrible mistake that we are making. So a lot of it is very, very subconscious. We're not trying to do that. What I call that, or what I think about these patterns, I call them imposing syndrome.
Yes.
Right? It's not an imposter syndrome. It's this fear of making an imposition on someone. We fear that we're making an imposition of their time, of their resources. Right? I can't ask for more budget. I couldn't possibly. And we say things like, it'll just take 2 seconds, or no worries if not. It's like, please, I'll just be so tiny as to not cause a worry. So we're shrinking down. And I know it's a bit cliche to say, take up space, or all of those sorts of things you see on, inspirational mugs. but essentially, when we're not taking up space, the inferences, I think, are quite serious. And so I'm really interested at the level of language. Are we accidentally undermining ourselves before we've even put our idea on the table? Like, it takes guts to think up a thing and to want to tell someone about it. And are we, in doing that brave step, accidentally kind of stepping backwards in doing so? And so you can see there's lots of ways that we can think about recasting those that would change, our confidence. And as you say, what's the relationship with that? I think the relationship is when you over-focus or over-rotate on likability, your own confidence does go down, because at each point you're questioning, am I worthy? Probably not. That's what your language is saying to me.
And, I run a program around imposter syndrome, actually, and self-doubt. And it's not about power poses and all of that kind of overt, what you think confidence looks like. It really is much more about that grounded kind of calm self-assurance that comes from knowing your worth. But I therefore speak to a lot of women and some men who genuinely don't feel worthy. They don't feel like they belong. And therefore that does come out in their language.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if, even if they change the way they speak, if they change the way they communicate, will that almost have the effect of bolstering their sense of, I do belong?
It really does.
Yeah,
it really does in my experience. Yeah. So I have a chapter in the book actually called Kill Your Confidence, which is the idea that the more we're told, I need to work on my confidence, or I need to fix my executive presence, we get in our own head about it, right? And we think, does this work? Is that working? And I don't know about you, but I've never been in a situation where someone said, thanks so much for such a confident meeting, right? Like we just don't think about it that way. But what we do say thank you for are like, you think, thanks for listening, thanks for validating, thanks for being creative, thanks for having good ideas. So a lot of it is really about, how can I demonstrate, or one of the frames I use is, even if I'm very down on myself and wondering, am I even worthy of being here, or is this a good idea, or I'm racked with a bit of doubt, how can I demonstrate that I am safe hands for this project, right? My manager or someone has thrown me a ball. How can I let them know I think I can catch it? And suddenly it's not about the optics and what I'm doing and how I'm sounding. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to show that I'm listening. I'm going to show that I've got an idea. I'm going to show that they shouldn't worry. Because as a manager, that is what you're looking. You're throwing things at people and hoping that they can catch them and hoping they don't drop them, right? That's sort of at its very basic essence. And so I find when I try to give people, there's a number of frames I talk through, but one of them is safe hands. And I think it's very actionable and very immediate. Like, oh, okay, I can channel, to your point, that calm assuredness and actually immediately start acting on something tangible and visible, which I think helps people, or gets them out of that sort of state of paralysis, which is, what am I doing? And more into like, okay, well, what am I doing? Like, let's look at the doing of it.
I love that. Even just the change in the inflection just changed that whole sentence. You're the communication expert. This is very clear. And I think some of these reframes are really important too. And just shifting how you're thinking about something can just make all the difference. One of the, you say it in the book, and it's obviously very obvious, but people pleasing is such a just a classic demonstration of prioritizing likability, like
Yes.
wanting people to
Yeah.
like you. And when you even people pleasing, if you reframe that, I don't know whether this is relevant to what we're talking about, but I was talking to somebody just the other day about it's actually being really inauthentic. Like you're actually making decisions based on what you think they want. You haven't even bothered to ask them what they want, by the way. You don't even know that that's what they want. And you're
Yes.
kind of manipulating yourself in order to get an outcome from them. Like that's kind of shady if you think about it. Like it's not actually a kind,
No.
selfless thing to do. And sometimes things like that just make light bulbs go off in people's minds, and you with the imposing syndrome, instead of imposter syndrome, it's just a different way of thinking about something that can lead to a much different outcome in terms of how you feel and then how you behave.
I completely agree with you on the inauthenticity part of people pleasing. I think it sounds like a nice thing. We want to please people, like, right? No one wants to necessarily go and displease people. But it's actually, if you think about it, if you're a manager and you have someone say, oh, sure, I can get it to you by Friday. Like, yes, I'll do it. And then they don't, right? That's profoundly disappointing and displeasing, right? I would much rather an honest assessment. Like, you know what? I've got 7 other things on my plate. Which do you want me to prioritize? Or I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get it by Friday, but I can do it by Monday. Like being honest and actually having that pause and working out what you can commit to honestly and transparently, to me, is a much more likable quality, and certainly a more sustainable one when you're working with a long-term relationship with someone, right? Because that's how you build trust. If you're displeasing, effectively by saying, sure, I can do it, and then producing subpar work or not producing the work at all, that to me is going to erode trust quite quickly and build a narrative in that vein instead. So that's the cautionary tale, I think, of people pleasing.
100%. And not to mention what that does to your own self-confidence when you don't deliver and how that makes you feel.
Right. We're very good at self-flagellating about it.
Right. You mentioned about the safe hands. And when you were talking about that in my mind, I was thinking that's really getting somebody to focus on what can I do? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, even people who are very confident in what they do, like I know I can do the job, they will often still struggle with confidence in terms of the interpersonal communication, like all those things you just said about how they come across or speaking up. So is that what you see? And why is that the case, do you think, or what can they do about it? You answer that however you want.
Yes, I do see it a lot. And I think the liberating thing is I see it from people whose resumes you would think they couldn't possibly think that way. These are VPs or SVPs or C-suite level folks who, you would look at their LinkedIn profiles and think, wow, like they wouldn't have a minute of self-doubt. And yet they're the same ones I'm working with who are expressing all of these similar ideas that you might hear from a new grad. And so the liberating side of that is that we're all in the same boat to some extent. The boat looks different, but we're all in it. But the other thing is it can be very paralyzing. So the frame that I use for them, maybe it's helpful if I give you an example.
Yeah,
the
do,
frame
please.
I use for them is, what was I hired for? So the example is, one of the women I coach is a senior VP of business development. So that her job is very external. She's focused on getting new business for the company. And she has a background in computer science. She works in a tech company, and she's often in a room full of engineers. And she said to me, Kate, it's awful because I'm always the least technical person in this room. And I said, well, of course you are. You're not hired to be the most technical person in the room. You're literally hired to be doing something very different. And she said, I always feel difficult because I get these very, very technical questions and I can't answer them. And I'm like, but again, what were you hired for? You were hired to do this thing. So oftentimes I think the mistake, and I do think this might be a bit gendered. I see this more in women than men. We think, well, we have to know everything. Right? We have to be the most technical and the most business-minded and, this and that. And actually, she only needs to fully, excel in her lane And as for the other stuff, she's probably, one, a lot more technical than I think she would admit. But two, she can redirect that and say, look, that's a great question for the VP of Eng, right? Like that's an engineering question. From a business development perspective, I would say A, B, and C, right? So you can reground in your own area of expertise. But I think that holds a lot of people back. Oh, I better not say something because I don't know enough.
Yes.
And that's where we get those minimizers. Oh, I'm not the expert, but, or you've probably already thought of this, but, or I'm not an engineer, but. We get it. You're not. You don't need to put that in neon lights for us. All you need to do is, own your own lane of excellence. And I think that sort of framing has been I've noticed a real shift in her over time, that confidence is, oh, wait, I don't have to know everything for everyone, and I can just excel in what I'm doing. And in fact, she's very brilliant at what she does do. So I don't know if that helps illustrate for people, but I think there's the what was I hired for lens can be a really nice one to remember. Few of us are hired to know every single thing about everything. Even CEOs trust their advisors, right? They trust their C-suite to say what's going on in, their respective areas.
Yeah. And when people get into their heads, even if it's incorrect, but when they get this idea that they need to know everything, or they get this idea that they're going to be put on the spot, they can't answer the question. From my perspective, from a psychologist perspective, and the work that I do, that just activates their whole nervous system and puts them into this fight or flight, freeze, kind of deer in the headlights state where they're not going to function at their best. So it's so important not just to have, and you and I can talk about some of those practical skills that they can do, but first and foremost, they've got to calm themselves down. And so if that shift to I don't have to know everything, if that calms down that level of anxiety a little bit, then anything that they say is going to be said with more calm, just more of that sort of calm presence that we're talking about.
And you talk about confidence and sort of, I guess, seniority. Calm is encoded with that. Right. The second somebody is all frazzled and, I'm not really sure, and which page was it, and, flustered, we don't think that that's C-level behavior, rightly or wrongly, right? We just have a sense of that. But we think about those C-suite people, they speak deliberately, slowly, they are unruffled, they're not surprised, right? They take things in their stride, they are demonstrating safe hands. And in fact, when you have a C-suite leader who is not doing that, it's really discombobulating and unsettling for the company, right? Because they feel dysregulated by anxiety coming from on top. So calm is the best way to get to confidence and also to look more senior than you are. It's a light bulb moment, I think, for a lot of people who are like, oh, is that all? That's actually what they mean by executive presence, right? Is actually, it's not wearing different clothes or using different vocabulary. It's often just taking things in your stride.
That's so interesting. And that you've just shortcutted. I was going to ask you that very question because, we use these, executive presence is one. You said before, if you ask somebody to be more confident, or if somebody says, I just need to be more confident, number one, that's a felt experience. And even when I ask people, if you were more confident, what would you be doing? A lot of people even struggle to articulate it. They just sort of feel like they'd know when they get there almost. Yes. And in the workplace, if you are told that, like in a performance review, you just need to be more confident. That's so, you point this out in your book, it's so unhelpful because it's so meaningless. What do you suggest that you either share with somebody else, or how an individual, how do they make that into something that's more tangible and actionable?
I think, you're exactly right. Be more confident is a little bit like saying be healthier. It sounds like it's a good thing and we sort of know what that might look like. Yeah. But for each of us, there's going to be a really different path to how to do it and what it actually looks like. So that's very normal and natural. This is not a listicle exercise, it's not do these 3 things and everything will be fine. So that's actually should be liberating, not depressing in my mind. The best way I can think about it is that because it's so inactionable and because it's this sort of amorphous thing, the best way to think about it is how can I be as connected and as present in all of my interactions as I can be? So am I listening? Am I being of service here? Am I being helpful? Am I sharing an idea when it comes to me? Am I responding when the meeting or the mood changes, right? Can I be nimble? These are excellent qualities that I think are really overlooked.
Yeah.
And instead, we get so outside of our head thinking, is this confident? Am I sitting confidently? Does my hair look confident in this? Sort of, and I'm being a bit facetious, but we have this sort of feeling about it. When we can stop doing that and just forget the externality of it and think internally, how am I making this work? I think it will really challenge people, or I encourage people to experiment with it, because you'll find that, I imagine you will find, in my experience, such a better and more robust conversation, and that other person will leave with a higher sense of trust in you, which, of course, in the cycle of all things becomes confidence, right? They have confidence in you. You start feeling confidence in yourself. It becomes quite a virtuous or a generative cycle rather than a like, ugh. And even if you don't have the right answer, that's fine. If you're unruffled and calm and regulated in those moments, you can say, you know what, that's a really great question. I'm going to take some time and dig into it, and I'll shoot you a note this afternoon, right? Like, I'm not afraid. I will look after it, is kind of where we're headed for when we are that connected.
Yeah. I love that. That needs to be on a Post-it note. Everybody needs that on a Post-it note on their desk right now. How can I be more connected and present and of service? How do I contribute, instead of how can I perform so that those people outside of me, what are they thinking of me? How are they judging me? All of that.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's the only thing we can control as
Right.
well, right?
Yeah.
I can only leave a meeting knowing I've done all of those things, and whatever anyone else thinks of me is up to them. So there's a beautiful phrase one of the women I coach she says, you can be the juiciest peach in the bowl, but some people just don't like peaches.
This
right?
is true too, right?
So, but you can control for your connectedness and presence. So I find that a really nice frame of mind to be in when I'm in one of those situations.
Yeah. You mentioned before about the likability and authority do not have to be mutually exclusive. You've got this great exercise in the book where you encourage people to have a list of what are typically feminine qualities, a list of what we would typically consider to be masculine, and find a way to blend them. Can you just talk a little bit about that and the impact that exercise has on people, like when you ask people to do that?
Oh, I'd love to. So one of the things I think is tricky for some women communicators is that we have a little bit of a preconceived notion of what words apply to us. So even things like power, some of the women I coach who I would think are very powerful, very senior, would say, oh no, but I don't identify with being powerful at all, right? Or I don't identify with being ambitious, or like I couldn't say that I was ambitious, right? There's sort of a socially acceptable or unacceptable tinge to some of those types of words. And those are words that tend to be more masculine coded, right? Even a word like negotiation, if you Google image search for that, it's usually men in suits shaking hands across a table, right? There's this sort of subconscious encoding we've done of those words as masculine. And so some of us feel not privy to those words or on the outside of those words. So one of the exercises, as you say, that I do is to say, is there a way that you can identify with some of these words? And it's not an exhaustive list I give, but I give some examples. And words that might be traditionally encoded as feminine. I don't mean that only women have them, but that we sort of socially believe are feminine. So things like being empathetic, collaborative, communal. And it becomes this beautiful exercise where I've had some gorgeous in workshops and when I work with people, examples. So one of them, someone says, well, I'm ambitiously communal. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, well, I'm super ambitious. I want my team to go really hard, really fast, like hit all of our metrics, but I want us to do it all together. And that's how she thinks about her leadership style. But she said, I'd never given voice to that, or I'd never felt like I could own the word ambitious because it felt like I was sort of sharp-elbowed or competitive or out for myself. And she said, I don't really feel like that. I really do genuinely feel like I'm lifting the team. I gave the presentation at one point and I had someone come up to me afterwards and said, I think you are rationally warm. And I was like, I can live with that. That was very kind. So there's an interesting, I think, mix where we can blend these. And I guess what I'm saying is clearly two words don't necessarily encompass us all, but it's a little way to poke at that binary or dichotomy by bringing together things that might feel dissonant, a little bit like the title, Powerfully Likeable.
Yeah,
you don't
right,
necessarily
exactly.
think that they could coexist comfortably, but actually I think there's a lot more wiggle room than we give it credit for. And one of the things I'm really excited by is when people start borrowing and getting rid of that rigidity, we get these really generative and interesting combinations that feel like I see a lot of relief in people. I see shoulders come down like, oh, that does speak to who I am and who I might feel like I am as a leader. And I say leader, I don't care if you lead a team or not, just somebody who's showing up every day. To give yourself that vocabulary is a lovely frame of mind to then approach all of your communication from.
It almost feels like it's a backdoor way in for women to feel like they can access or have the right to some of those qualities, I guess. And it would be nice if going forward that they become much less, like the definitions change,
Yes.
or that we can see them as more inclusive and not this or that.
Yeah.
As you were talking, I was thinking of your example of like all of the Siris and the Alexas, they're all female voices because they're assistants. Like it's when you start to see things like that, I mean, it can really make you mad, can't it? Like
Yes.
just the way we are so programmed.
Women don't make asks, they answer them, right? That's the cultural coding. And so AI assistants work in that sort of secretarial, 1950s secretarial mode, right? That we fix problems, we don't make them. We answer things, we don't ask them. And there's no surprise to me that we subconsciously encode that. And it's really related to that imposing syndrome, right? I better not be the one who's making the ask or being the problem, or I instead must have the solution. I talk a little bit in the book, my hypothesis. I mean, there's many reasons and many cultural moments that I think have led us to that. But one of my hypotheses is also many of us grow up around women who are like, have the nail file, the drink of water, the Band-Aid, the packet of tissues, we answer the problem, right? This is as there's sort of a maternal encodedness to some of this as well. And so it's not a long bow to draw. I think that when we enter a workplace context, we are sort of positioned or feel like self-position to be answering rather than asking.
Yeah, I read that part of the book and I was thinking, yeah, and that's always the woman's got the handbag because she's carrying all the things. She's carrying the Band-Aid and the snack and the lip balm, and then the man or the child says, I don't want to carry a bag, but can you put this in yours? Oh.
I've taken to having a bag that only fits my things now.
Same. And they'll still try to jam their
small
stuff
act
in
of
it.
rebellion. It's a small handbag.
Do you know that my teenage daughter, who's done that to me forever, like she's 19 now, she actually said to me the other day, oh my God, Mum, she was out with a boyfriend and she said he didn't want to take a bag, but could I carry his stuff? She said, oh my God. So she experienced it. She was on the other side of it. And I said, you see?
Feminism 101.
You're right, though. You're right. Like there's so much conditioning. I didn't feel like we even needed to go into it because it's just so clear, all of that social, the gendered expectations of women, all the jobs that are traditionally feminine are paid the least, all of that kind of stuff. But clearly then that has this flow-on effect when you get into workplaces and women start to move up or want to move up, and all of this conditioning and expectation can very much hold people back and not just undermine their own confidence, but how other people interact with them in the workplace as well, which leads me to women often get talked over, they get interrupted, they get ideas stolen from them. That is all terrible and it happens. How do you suggest women in those very real situations where they've spoken up and they've been interrupted, do you have advice about how women best handle situations like that when they're confronted with it?
It's a great question. And I'm glad we're touching on this as well, that there are both individual things you can do as a woman, but there are also bigger systemic things that are happening outside of us. So by all means, my philosophy and the book is really not coming at it like, you're broken, you're the problem.
No.
It's very much like we're all existing in the world, and what are the tools that we can bring, and what are the things that a workplace can do. I think there are some simple ones, and this is on the assumption that you're not in a hyper-toxic environment that you need to leave, right? This is on the assumption that it's hopefully an accident that those things were happening, right? Or an oversight rather than a malicious or, really, really toxic sort of situation where it's happening on purpose. One of them, there's a theory that's come out of the Obama White House, which was called amplification, which is where someone else in the room can say, actually, she wasn't finished talking. So you can help amplify others, which actually helps engender a culture of people maybe doing that for you as well. If it's happened for you, you've been talked over, for example, or an idea has been stolen and no one else is coming to your aid, which is, I think, happens most of the time, you can say something like, that's really interesting. That was what I was talking about last week when we did this, and just keep going, right? Just keep flowing on. The argument isn't, I said it. It's just making a reference to it and moving on. So it's just like, I'm so glad we're putting this on the agenda. This is something I've been working on 2 weeks ago, or blah, blah, blah. So you're planting that seed that there is some sort of social ownership over it. It is difficult, and we don't want to make that the argument because it feels small and people can be put off by that, which is fair enough. But making the point and then moving on to something gives you a bit of momentum and also makes the point at the same time. So that can be one way to think about it.
The point that you make, though, about other people pointing it out, and, again, that's not something that an individual necessarily has control over, but wherever possible, where workplaces and organizational culture is kind of on board with this and people are willing to speak up or to point out or highlight that that's what she said, then all of that is obviously going to be helpful, and also create an environment where people feel, back to that confidence thing, people feel safer.
Yes.
People feel more trust.
Yes, absolutely. And to your point earlier about confidence, you look very confident if you can give someone else a compliment. Right?
Yes.
So if you are just regulated and calm and you're like, Cass, that was such an amazing job you did, or everybody, Cass did an amazing job when we went to that thing last week, right? If you're just calling that out, it's like, I am not afraid. I am not worried anyone's coming for my job. It can be very encoded as a senior move to make. You can be the most junior person in the room, but calling out a compliment like that is a really lovely way to say, I'm unafraid, right?
Yeah.
People who are worried about their job or position would not do that.
I love that. And it's so interesting. I've had a few conversations recently, Kate, and I just actually published a podcast with Jennifer Moss, who is a workplace wellbeing strategist, and she talks about happiness at work. And she raised this idea, and it was in my mind as I was reading your book, about spreading positive gossip, like speaking what you're saying basically, but like talking nicely about people behind their back, even if they're not there, which she was talking about it in terms of creating this culture of psychological safety and trust, and that people kind of assume if everybody gets talked about nicely behind their back, you're probably saying nice things about me too. So that makes me feel good.
Yes.
But your take on that, it's what you've just said about a similar thing, that it also shows you, like it also presents you as being confident. Like that's a very nice side effect, like a nice bonus from doing that same behavior.
Definitely a bonus. It has to be a genuine compliment, right? Like people can smell when it's not right. But yes, it's doing two lovely things at once, right? It's good karma. You're happily giving kudos or credit to someone where it's due. And by extension, as you say, that the side effect is that you're positioning yourself as pretty confident. It's a very, very clever, I think, and strategic thing to do. It's also just a really nice thing to do.
Of course, yeah. And that's what we want more of, right? Yeah. Kindness, God, instead of all of this competition and feeling afraid all of the time. Kate, you're the communication expert, and I was listening to, again, I don't remember where, a podcast or something a little while ago on the topic of communication at work. And I heard this woman say something along the lines of that when men communicate, if they're presenting a point at work, that they typically focus on content. Whereas women typically, for whatever reason, they often are all about context. And so therefore, when presenting a point, a woman, I this stuck with me because I can relate to it. I thought it sounds like me. A woman will need to give you all the backstory and the context before getting to the point, which is the thing they want you to do or the decision that they want you to make or where they think we should go next. And that can often, like, people tune out, they haven't got time, it's all waffle, blah, blah. And she was sort of suggesting that women need to retrain themselves to lead with content. Is that your experience? Is that a thing? And how do you suggest that women take that on board when they're considering how they communicate at work if they want to be perceived as being more authoritative?
It's a great question. Yes, I see it a lot. The metaphor I often use is that I think women, you know, those Where's Wally books where you've got to find Wally amongst, you know, this crazy landscape. Women like to explain that whole double page, right? And then tell you where Wally is. And men usually start with, here's Wally, right? And we say men, I would probably layer that with more senior leaders tend to start with there's Wally because we don't have time for all that context. And if they want the context, they tend to double click on it. And some people, depending on their communication style and preferences, will get frustrated with like, why are you telling me the whole landscape when I just want to know where he is, right? To continue the metaphor. Yeah. So thinking about what is the thing that I am identifying, right? What is the win here or what is the issue at hand? When I worked at Google, they used to have shorthand. I'm sure lots of companies had this, but it was the TLDR, the too long didn't read. What's the TLDR if I only had one sentence to describe this? So it can be as simple as starting off maybe it's your meeting update or your presentation. I'm going to walk through the 3 options that we have that we're looking for a new vendor. Right. So that's my headline. The output of this is that by the end of the meeting, I'd like to have clarity on which one we're going to choose, something like that. And then proceeding to walk through the 3. Or even better, I've decided on a vendor and this meeting is to get approval of whatever. And someone else says, did you have other vendors? Yes, I'm happy to go into those. But just being able to take a position and then signposting that for others. Again, people think it's safe hands, she's done her homework, but we don't always have to show every piece of knowledge we have about said product or project. We can reliably know we've done that work and we're making a decision accordingly.
I think that's so helpful. When I felt really seen when I heard that woman say that, I thought, oh yeah, my husband feels that every day. And I notice even in podcast interviews, like I almost like to have to tell the person, probably doing it now, like I have to tell all the backstory about how I came to this question before I actually ask the question, because I'm a psychologist, not a journalist too, let's face it. But you know, like I thought, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. I kind of feel like I have to give the backstory before I get to the actual point when they just want to know what's the bloody question here. Or my husband just wants to know what's the point of this? What are you telling me?
And it's not a bad or a good thing. It's like that you'll meet contextual thinkers and you'll meet, you know, content thinkers, if we can think about them as those distinctions. Right. So neither of them is wrong and both have their purpose. Like there's going to be times where people do want that double click, like, wait, tell me about the 10 vendors that you've spoken with to get to this one vendor, right? Like that could be a very legitimate thing. So I don't want people to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm doing the wrong thing here. But it's really understanding, as always, who's our audience and what do they need from us? And if they're not a contextual person, or if you've noticed they tend to err on that like headline, decision, outcome kind of framework, it might be helpful to recast what you're doing in a way that they understand. So you're sort of code switching or translating a little bit in order to be more effective with that person. So to me, that's not inauthenticity. It's just taking what you did say and sort of recasting it or reordering it, if you like.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to pick up on, you talked about needing to know everything. You talk about in the book when people lacking confidence, they will often over prepare. And, you know, we see this with the people who experience self-doubt, the perfectionism, the needing to be prepared for every possible outcome. Why is it better that we don't over prepare? How can over preparing actually be doing ourselves a disservice?
Great question. So at the outset, I think it's important to say preparation is a good thing. It's the over preparation, which I really want to push on. So preparing is great. Preparing, knowing who you're speaking to, understanding the background, doing your homework, all really important. What I'm talking about is I meet a lot of senior leaders who say, I used to do things like practice going through a presentation 10 plus times. And I am now in a position where it's unsustainable. I can't do that for every meeting I'm doing, right? Or I can't do it to the level that I thought that I was successful at. And what that means is that you've gotten yourself into this awkward dead end where you've prepared, 10x maybe more than you needed to, or 5x more, and it's not something you can continue to do. So starting off earlier with a lighter preparation is something I'm very big on. Why is it bad? Well, one, it takes a lot of time. So when we're trying to think about being efficient and effective with our work and our time, over preparing really bogs us down and slows us down. But more importantly, even than that, is that I think it can take you out of being that present and connected person. Exactly. If you've had this preconceived, prepared notion of here's my script, I'm going to stick to it perfectly. What if they veer away? What if you're required to be a little bit nimble? What if the problem changes as you're speaking? Suddenly you've anchored yourself to this script or these ideas, and it can be really hard or challenging for folks to drop them and move accordingly. And so I think it can really mire us in either unhelpful points in that conversation, or it can make us just lose our focus and be less able to respond, creatively and with our whole brain. I also find sometimes when people have studied something so well and they know their verbatim script, they're more prone to stumble because they're like, oh, I can't remember the exact turn of phrase that I used, or wait, I had a better way of saying that in my practice, and now it's lacking, and now you can see the confidence sort of drain out of them real time. So never practicing verbatim is something that I really encourage. So don't do it word for word, but also just run through it as concepts and know the direction of where you're headed, and then leave it be. Trust that you will be able to pick that up and go with it. I give a lot of strategies for like a lighter touch preparation framework. And that's really to say most of us can rely on a lot of innate knowledge and ability in the moment, but we just need to kind of get ourselves there slowly. So by all means, don't do a 180. If you've practiced something 10x times, don't just never practice it again, but maybe practice it 8 times and then 6 times, and then just wean yourself off a little bit such that you're growing the trust in yourself, I think, that you are able to do it.
Yeah, because, in my experience too, the people who over-prepare, who do prepare 10 times to do the presentation, then come to believe that doing a good job requires 10 times. Exactly. And so then if they are in a position where they can't do 10 times, the default thought is that it's not going to be good because I haven't had my 10 times. It leads to this perpetuating this over-functioning, which just causes burnout eventually.
Yes, it really does. And you're right. We get fixated on like, if it's not X, then I'm a failure, or then I'm going to be bad. And it might be that the first few times you do it less is not as good as what you were doing. But that's maybe also what your job requires of you now. Maybe you've got 8 of those presentations every 2 days. So it's about finding a comfort level with it and trusting that you have a lot of baseline knowledge that you can bring to the fore.
You were a world champion debater, Kate. You have a lot of debating stories. I'm so impressed, by the way, because that would terrify me. Debating would terrify me. But you've got some great stories about what you learned from debating. Like, what did you learn from your debating experience that has served you well in how you communicate in big, important kind of jobs in corporations? Like, what are the things that you think were the really good lessons that you took from debating?
What didn't I learn, Cass? I think it was like my education in so many things. I think I learned to not be afraid, because when you get up and you feel naked and you don't have anything to say and you have to make it up on the spot and you can do it and you sit down and realize the world didn't collapse, that's a very powerful thing. I think I learned that I have a lot of different strings in my bow when it comes to communicating. Part of what I used to do a lot when I was much younger was be 100% aggressive the whole time, and realizing that actually wasn't very effective to be one mode of anything all the time, that communication naturally has ebbs and flows and drama in it. We can get excited or angry about some things, and then we can be more pulled back in other times. So that was like understanding that pattern and nuance of communication was really fascinating. It also served me or taught me a ton about logic and the way, if you have to present in order a list of persuasive arguments about something, how and why would you order it that way? And what's the strategy behind that? You do that enough times in enough different topics, and you start seeing a lot of patterns, or for me, I did, and realizing the innate sort of structures that are behind most things. So you hear then a politician or a CEO or someone say something, you have a framework by which to judge how robust that argument is, or where to poke it to make it fall over, essentially. So, it's really taught me everything. And it's been, I actually believe everyone should do it, just because I feel it was such a valuable part of my education as both a human, but also as someone who likes to think and play with ideas. I think it's a real playground.
I loved your debating stories throughout the book, and just that idea. I think you're right. That idea from an early age, from a young age, having to be on the spot and having to face, you're not going to get it right. Mm-hmm. I think especially for girls who are very much going for the gold stars and going for the study hard and get the A+. I think that's a very different kind of model, a very different training ground, isn't it? To just be, you just got to wing it, and you just got to.
Absolutely.
And you're not always going to get it right, and that's okay too.
Yes. Yeah, you fall and you fail and you flail, and then you have these wonderful moments where it does come together and you think, wow, I did that. So there's joy and satisfaction and excitement as well. And it's maybe as a kid the only place it's cool to be smart, which was kind of a joy. If you're a bit of a nerdy kid, you feel very seen and very excited to be like, oh, finally I get to take the floor for 5 minutes and tell you my opinions. It was quite a joyous thing.
Kate, you've written a whole book, obviously, but I guess just to wrap up, if for women who struggle with their communication at work and they struggle with confidence, what's the takeaway that you would want them to have? What's the one message that you would want to share?
Oh, gosh.
I know, big question, sorry.
It's a huge question, but it's a great one. It's very juicy. I think the dual messages, maybe, if I can be cheeky and say, you're probably doing a much better job than you already think, is part of it. And the second one is just be kind. Like this book, I've really positioned it as an invitation rather than a prescription, right? This is a invitation to think about where you are, how you're currently showing up, where you peak and where you maybe have challenges. And it's really an invitation to say, if some of this resonates with you, give it a try. Bring it into your world, see what works, see what doesn't, roll around in it a little bit. And if it's useful and if it resonates and sticks, by all means, carry on. But I think be kind to yourself in that process, because I don't think any of us need another voice telling us what to do or not what to do. This is very much more of I like to think of it as a friendly guide that might be useful in certain times or in difficult conversations. And that's where it should be, there as a friendly place on your bookshelf.
Absolutely. Kate, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I could have chatted for hours.
I know. The problem is that I really could. Crappy to Happy is created and produced by me, Cass Dunn. If you enjoy the show, please hit the follow button wherever you listen to ensure you never miss an episode. Share with a friend to get me into the ears of more lovely listeners, and I would love for you to leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much for being here, and I cannot wait to catch you next week for another fabulous episode of Crappy to Happy.